There is a very strange moment in life that not everyone recognizes when it happens. You do not achieve what you want. Things do not go according to plan. It may even feel like you are moving backward. But at the same time, at a very deep level, you sense the opposite, as if something is quietly rearranging itself, even though on the surface everything looks completely chaotic. The paradox is this: the more you try to return to your old state, the more you feel you no longer belong to it. What once worked no longer brings the same results. The ways you once used to move forward now begin to slow you down. And this is what makes many people believe they are losing direction, or worse, falling behind. But from Jung's perspective, this is not a sign of decline. This is the beginning of a reversal that you cannot immediately see. A kind of backward movement where everything must temporarily stop working so that a different order can form. In this video, we will go through 7 subtle signs that show you are not lost at all, but are getting very close to the greatest comeback of your life, not by returning to who you used to be, but by stepping into a version of yourself you have never operated as before. And if you are seeing this video at this exact moment, it may not be a coincidence. Number 1. The breakdown of life structure, when external things no longer function as before. There are phases in life where you can no longer recognize where the change began. You only know that what once ran smoothly has suddenly become heavy and out of sync. Your job is still there. Your relationships are still there. The plans you once made are still intact, but the way they function is no longer the same. You still try to keep everything in its familiar state, still do what you used to do, but the results are no longer the same. This is not an emotional crisis, but a breakdown at a deeper level, the structural level of life. When external systems are no longer aligned with who you are becoming, they begin to show signs of distortion. You may find yourself putting in more effort, but getting less result, interacting with others, but no longer feeling the same connection, pursuing goals, but no longer feeling like you are moving forward. It is like a machine that is still running, but the gears inside have shifted off-axis, causing the entire system to operate awkwardly. And it is exactly at this moment that many people begin to doubt themselves. They think they are doing something wrong, that if they just try a little harder, hold on a little tighter, everything will return to normal. But what they do not realize is, the problem is not the effort, but the foundation that effort is built upon. When a structure has expired, trying to maintain it does not create recovery, it only prolongs the misalignment. I once knew a man who worked in a large company for over 10 years. He had a stable position, a good income, and a clear path ahead. But gradually, he noticed he had to expend more energy to complete tasks that once felt familiar. Meetings became heavier, decisions slower, and goals that once excited him now felt like obligations. Everything was still fine by external standards, but within that system, he knew something had shifted off its original axis. He tried to hold on, to adapt, even convinced himself this was just a temporary phase. But the more he tried to hold on, the clearer the misalignment became. Only when he accepted that this structure no longer fit who he was becoming did he begin to see another path. That is the nature of a breakdown. It does not destroy you, it only destroys what is no longer suitable for your continued growth. But because this change happens at the structural level, it is not loud. There is no clear moment where you can say, everything has ended. Instead, it is a series of small misalignments accumulating over time until you can no longer operate the same way. If you are in this phase, you may have asked yourself, why has everything become harder, even though I am still doing what I used to do? Why do things that once worked no longer function? And more importantly, why am I seeing these signs now? The answer lies right in the title of the video you are watching. You are seeing this not by chance. You are recognizing this breakdown because a part of you is already ready to move into another phase. The breakdown is not a sign of failure, but a signal that the old system is no longer sufficient to contain your new version. Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order." What you are experiencing may look like disorder, but at a deeper level, it is following a very precise order. When a structure is no longer suitable, it must crack to make space for another to form. And that process always begins with the misalignment you are feeling. So instead of trying to force everything back to the way it was, perhaps the more important question is not, how do I hold on, but what needs to change? Because sometimes the clearest sign of a powerful comeback is not when everything is working well, but when it can no longer continue the way it used to. And from that point of misalignment, a new path begins to open, quietly but irreversibly. Number 2. The emergence of the shadow, when buried parts begin to reveal themselves. And when external structures begin to drift away from their familiar orbit, something else, deeper and harder to grasp, also quietly unfolds. Not in the world around you, but within you. There is a phenomenon many people experience during this phase, but rarely name. You begin reacting in ways you never thought you would. A small comment may linger and irritate you. A normal situation may trigger disproportionate tension. Or sometimes you notice yourself becoming more controlling, doubtful, or dependent than usual. These reactions do not come from the situation, but seem to arise from a deeper place, as if a part of you is stepping into the light after a long time being held in the dark. This is when what Carl Jung called the shadow begins to surface. Not as an abstract idea, but as the collection of parts within you that were once denied, pushed beneath awareness because they did not fit the image you wanted to maintain about yourself. And the important thing is, the shadow does not appear because you are becoming worse, but because you are becoming open enough to see it. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Light does not come from trying to be more positive or more perfect, but from recognizing and facing what you once did not want to see. And the paradox is, the closer you are to real transformation, the more clearly the shadow tends to appear, not to destroy you, but to be acknowledged. In literature, there is a striking image in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll is a respected, moral, and proper man, always maintaining a perfect image before the world. But precisely because he tries to maintain that image, he separates the unacceptable parts of himself and pushes them into the dark. And from that rejected part, Hyde emerges, not as a stranger, but as a real part of Jekyll, simply no longer controlled. The terrifying thing is not Hyde, but that Jekyll believed he could exist without facing that part. In the end, what was denied becomes what controls him. This story is not just a tragedy, but a mirror reflecting how humans treat their shadow. The more it is denied, the stronger it becomes. The more it is avoided, the more it finds a way to surface. In real life, this often appears in very ordinary ways. A person who sees themselves as easygoing may suddenly feel unusual irritation toward others. Someone who believes they are independent may realize they depend more on others' responses than they thought. A person who always controls everything may begin to see how deeply the fear of losing control has been shaping them. These are not sudden changes, but revelations of what has always been there, only previously unseen. Imagine the surface of a dam that appears calm, holding water for a long time. The pressure does not disappear, it accumulates. And at a certain point, small cracks begin to appear. Not because the dam suddenly became weak, but because the internal pressure has reached a level that can no longer be contained. The shadow operates in the same way. It is not created in this moment. It has always existed, only now it begins to have space to appear. And this is where many people misunderstand the entire process. They think these reactions are signs that they are losing control or going in the wrong direction. But in reality, they are a very precise sign that something important is happening. Because you cannot step into a more complete version of yourself if the denied parts are still outside of awareness. Because sometimes, the most powerful comeback in your life does not begin with building something new, but with having the courage to look directly at what has always been there, but you have never truly seen. What about you? If you are ready, share your story in the comments. Not to explain or prove anything, but simply to name what you have experienced, because sometimes speaking it is the first step to truly seeing it. Number 3. Axis. Identity disruption. When the system of who I am no longer functions. But if the denied parts have begun to surface, what happens when the very way you once understood yourself no longer holds its shape? There is a very subtle moment that not everyone recognizes immediately. You no longer react the old way, but you cannot yet name the new way. The definitions that once helped you understand yourself, who you are, what suits you, where you belong, gradually lose their accuracy. You may notice this in small details, a familiar situation, but you no longer respond the same way. A choice you once felt certain about, but now hesitate, or simply the feeling that roles that once fit perfectly now feel strangely constricting. I remember the story of a woman named Isabel shared in a group therapy session. She said that for a long time, she saw herself as someone who was always understanding, always maintaining harmony in her family, always the one who yielded to keep things peaceful. But then, one very ordinary day, in a small conversation with a relative, she realized she no longer wanted to respond that way. Not because she was angry, but because the old response suddenly no longer felt like hers. Isabel said, "I can still say those familiar sentences, but when I say them, I feel like I am playing someone else." What confused her was not the external conflict, but the feeling that she no longer matched the role she had been attached to for so long. This is not emotional fluctuation, but a disruption at a deeper level, the level of identity. In psychology, this is called identity disruption, when the system of who I am temporarily loses continuity. Our brain is designed to maintain a stable narrative about ourselves, stored and reinforced through a network called the default mode network, a system that helps connect memory, experience, and expectation into a continuous flow. But when new experiences no longer align with the old narrative, this system begins to experience noise, and you feel it as instability in how you recognize yourself. There are moments when you no longer feel like you are becoming, but more like you are paused between two versions, not moving forward in a clear way, but also unable to return to the past. This state often pushes people to quickly find a new definition to cling to, without realizing that the pause is not a mistake, but the necessary space for a deeper structure to form on its own. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what few realize is that before becoming, one must pass through a phase of no longer knowing who they are in the old way. This is not a loss, but the necessary space for a new structure to form. You cannot update a system if the old version is still running. And in this phase, you are not immediately given a new definition to replace the old one, because the new identity is not something you instantly choose, but something that gradually forms through experience. What matters here is not trying to immediately define who you are, but recognizing that losing the old definition is part of the transformation. Many people at this stage try to return to what is familiar, not because it is still true, but because it provides a sense of certainty. But the nature of this disruption is irreversible. Once you have seen the misalignment between who you are now and the old image, you cannot unsee it. You are seeing this not by chance. Recognizing this disruption in your identity is a sign that you are moving closer to a change that cannot be expressed through old definitions. And even if this phase feels unclear, without specific guidance, it still carries a very precise meaning. You are in the middle of a process whose outcome cannot yet be named, but whose direction has already begun. And sometimes, no longer knowing who you are in the old way is the first step to becoming a version of yourself you have never imagined before. Number 4. The collapse of belief systems. When you begin to see the unconscious scripts. At a very particular point, you begin to look back at your past choices and realize they did not truly come from you, but from beliefs you unconsciously absorbed long ago. What once seemed obviously right no longer carries the same weight. You may see that you tried very hard to achieve something, but when you reach or come close to it, a quiet question arises. Why did I want this in the first place? And when that question becomes clear enough, the entire system of thinking that once guided you begins to shake. This is a form of cognitive crisis, where the unconscious scripts, the implicit rules you once believed were truths, begin to lose their validity. These scripts are rarely learned directly, but formed through experience, environment, and repeated messages from early on. They shape how you understand value, success, love, and even how you position yourself in the world. And only when you have gone far enough do you begin to realize you have been living by a map you never verified. I once heard a man share in a personal therapy session. He grew up in a family where recognition was always tied to achievement. Every time he accomplished something, he received attention and pride from others, and gradually he formed a deep belief. Only when I achieve something do I have value. That belief followed him for many years, pushing him to constantly strive, constantly set new goals. But at a certain point, When he had achieved almost everything he once set out to do, he felt a void that was hard to explain. Not because he lacked goals, but because the motivation behind them no longer felt convincing. He said, "I realized I did not truly want those things. I only thought I had to want them." And the moment he saw that, his entire understanding of life began to change. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This means that when you are not aware of the unconscious beliefs operating within you, you will continue to act according to them and believe those actions are your own choices. But when you begin to see them, you do not just lose a belief, you lose the sense of certainty that belief once provided. Imagine you are following a map you believe is accurate. You walk step by step, thinking you are going in the right direction. But then, at some point, you realize the map was drawn incorrectly from the beginning. Not because you walked wrong, but because the guide you trusted was never right. And once you see that, you cannot continue walking the same path. This is the feeling of belief system collapse. It forces you to stop, not because you do not know what to do, but because you no longer believe in the old reasons for doing it. And that stopping creates a very particular space where you cannot rely on previous rules, but also do not yet have a new system to replace them. In this phase, many people rush to find another belief to fill the void, just to regain a sense of certainty. But the nature of this process is not about replacing an old belief with a new one, but learning to exist without clinging to a predefined script. Because only when what is no longer true is completely removed can you begin to see what truly fits you. Remember that recognizing that the beliefs that once guided you no longer hold power is a sign that you are moving into another level of awareness, where you are no longer controlled by what you have never questioned. And even if that makes you feel like you have lost a familiar anchor, it is precisely what opens the possibility for you to build an entirely new understanding of life. Sometimes, the most powerful comeback in your life does not come from believing in something more, but from having the courage to see that what you once believed was never the complete truth. If this moment made you pause, reflect, or see yourself in a different way, press like on this video, not only to support us, but as a simple way for you to mark. This is the moment you begin to see what you have never seen before. Number 5. Conscious behavioral adjustment. When you begin to choose differently. If the implicit rules that once guided you no longer hold their validity, then what happens next does not lie in understanding more, but in the way you begin to choose differently in the smallest actions. At this point, a very clear yet very quiet shift appears. You no longer react out of habit as before, but begin to have a brief pause between stimulus and response. Not to overanalyze, but to choose. What once happened almost automatically, the way you reply to messages, the way you agree with others, the way you stay in situations that exhaust you, no longer occurs immediately. And that pause itself is the first sign that you are shifting from being controlled to self-directed. This change is not loud, not declarative, but unfolds through very specific choices in daily life. You begin to say no in situations where you always said yes before. You leave a conversation earlier than usual, not because you are uncomfortable, but because you realize you do not need to stay. You also no longer participate in relationships that drain your energy. even though you once believed they were necessary. There is no clear theory being applied here, only a direct and very practical adjustment in how you engage with the world. I recall Emma Watson, the globally known actress for her role as Hermione Granger in the Harry Potter series, during a period when she chose to step back from the spotlight. After many years in the entertainment industry, where every schedule and every image was prearranged, she began to realize she was living in a rhythm that no longer belonged to her. There was no specific event that triggered it, but she chose to pause, to not take on new projects, to not appear excessively, and to spend time on things she had always postponed. What is notable is not the big decision, but the way she began adjusting each small behavior. How she chose where to appear, how she spent her time, how she interacted with the world. She once said it was the first time she truly felt she was choosing rather than simply continuing. And from those small choices, an entirely different path gradually formed. Carl Jung once wrote, "We are not what happened to us, we are what we choose to become." This statement is not about major turning points, but about the capacity to choose in each moment. When you no longer react according to old patterns, you are not just changing behavior, but gradually reshaping the way your life is formed. Because behavior is not just an outcome, it is the direct tool that creates the reality you are living. Imagine you are rewriting a code that has been running for many years. Previously, every time there was a certain input, the system would always return a fixed result. But now, you begin to change each small line of command. Not rewriting the entire program immediately, but adjusting each response, each choice. At first, the change may be very small, almost unnoticeable, but over time, the entire way the system operates begins to change. Not because you force it, but because you intervened at the point where results are created. What matters is that in this stage, you do not need to understand everything to begin changing. You also do not need a complete map or a new belief system. The only thing necessary is the ability to recognize, I can choose differently in this moment. And each time you do that, you are reinforcing a new direction, even if it has not yet been named. The difference does not lie in immediate results, but in the fact that you no longer automatically return to old patterns as before. You are seeing this not by chance. The fact that you are beginning to choose differently, even in very small details, is a clear sign that your transformation has entered its most practical stage. It no longer lies in realization or understanding, but manifests directly in how you operate within your own life, day by day, choice by choice, action by action, that may seem small, but are in fact decisive. Number 6. The formation of a new inner state when you become internally stable. So what happens when the small choices you repeat every day no longer only change how you act, but begin to touch a deeper level, where not behavior, but your inner state itself quietly shifts in a way you have never experienced before? At a very subtle stage, you may notice that your reaction speed slows down. Situations that once easily triggered you no longer create the same level of disturbance. This change does not come from an effort to control, but from the fact that within you, the need to react in the old way gradually disappears. Something has shifted at a deeper level, where responses no longer arise from familiar impulses, but from a steadier point that you begin to sense. This steadiness is not a fixed state, but a different way of being with yourself. You are still in the same circumstances as before, but the internal experience is no longer the same. An unfavorable situation still occurs, but it no longer pulls you away from your center as it once did. You are still aware of what is happening, but no longer carried away by it in the same way. A viewer of the channel named Lisa once shared that in the past, whenever something unexpected happened, she would immediately feel tense and try to regain control of everything. After some time, she realized those reactions gradually lost their familiar intensity. The difference was not that she tried to be calmer, but that the need to keep everything under control quietly dissolved. Lisa said, "I am not doing anything differently, but inside me there is no longer a feeling that I have to intervene in everything." And it is precisely this shift that made her experience in similar situations completely different. From a scientific perspective, this may relate to an adjustment in how the nervous system processes stimuli. When you no longer react according to old patterns, the limbic system, where rapid emotional responses are processed, no longer dominates your reactions as before. Instead, regions associated with regulation and integration of information begin to participate more, creating a space between stimulus and response. This space is not suppression, but the ability to maintain internal stability even when external conditions change. Carl Jung once said that individuation is the process of integrating fragmented parts within a person into a whole. And as this process deepens, what you feel is not perfection, but a form of balance that does not depend on circumstances. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. As this acceptance becomes more real, the need to control, to prove, to maintain an image also gradually loses its foundation." Imagine a spinning top that has found its balance point. When it is off-center, it must spin rapidly and continuously to maintain stability. But when its center of gravity is properly aligned, its motion becomes stable without excessive effort. Humans are the same. When your inner center is no longer misaligned, you do not need to do more to maintain your state. Stability does not come from external control, but from no longer being internally off-center. What is remarkable is that this state does not depend on whether everything around you is favorable. You may still face fluctuations, situations that are not as desired, but the way you experience them has changed. Not because you have become numb, but because you no longer need to react in order to confirm something about yourself. A new inner state begins to form when you realize your reactions are no longer as rushed. The need for control gradually settles, and you no longer need to prove anything to feel okay. This does not come from effort, but emerges as a natural consequence of what you have truly seen and integrated within, as if a deeper part of you has quietly reorganized your entire internal order without your intervention. And sometimes, the most powerful comeback in your life does not come from doing more, but from no longer needing to strain to keep yourself stable as before. And if you recognize that you are in this state, where everything inside gradually settles and becomes steady in a very natural way, leave one word in the comments: centered. No need to explain too much, just a very simple way for you to acknowledge that you have reached a point you have always searched for, but never truly touched before. Number 7. Synchronization with life. When reality begins to reflect the new you. And when all the previous shifts have settled into their proper places, what you begin to notice is no longer within, but in the way life gradually responds to you in a new order, more seamless and precise than ever before. At this stage, something very particular begins to appear. You no longer have to actively search for what suits you in the way you did before. Opportunities do not come in a dramatic or sudden way, but appear naturally, almost exactly when you are ready to receive them. Relationships no longer carry underlying tension or recurring conflict, but become lighter, clearer, as if each person is standing in their right place without needing to adjust each other. Life does not become perfect, but the way it operates begins to carry a sense of flow, where things happen without you having to constantly intervene or force them. An acquaintance of mine once shared that after many years of always feeling like he had to work twice as hard to achieve anything, he began to experience something very different. He did not change his goals, nor did he set new strategies, but opportunities for collaboration, offers, and even important encounters began to appear in ways he had never experienced before. He said, "I no longer feel like I am chasing life. Things seem to come to me on their own, and I just need to recognize what fits." What changed was not what happened externally, but that what appeared began to align with who he had become rather than who he had tried to become. This reflects a very simple but rarely seen principle. When you are no longer misaligned with yourself, you no longer create invisible resistance between you and reality. What is suitable does not need to be pulled toward you, because you are already standing where it can appear. What is no longer suitable also gradually leaves without a clear separation, because there is no longer a common ground to sustain it. Imagine a current that has always existed, but was once divided by invisible rocks. The water still flows, but is deflected, swirling, creating chaotic movements. When those obstacles are gone, the current does not need to flow harder to move forward. It naturally becomes continuous, moving ahead without obstruction. Life operates in the same way. When you no longer create internal misalignment, the external flow begins to move smoothly without requiring increased effort. Carl Jung once wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious." This does not stop at a state of awareness or an inner experience, but extends to how reality itself begins to reflect who you have become. When you no longer operate based on old patterns, what comes to you is no longer limited by those patterns either. What is notable is that at this stage, you do not need to constantly check or maintain your state. You still participate in life, still make decisions, still move in your own direction, but there is no longer a sense of strain to make things go your way. What is right is no longer defined by what you achieve, but by whether what happens no longer contradicts who you are at this moment. Sometimes, you will encounter very small moments that are clear enough to recognize this change. A seemingly random meeting that opens a new direction, a simple choice that leads you to an entirely different experience. You just need to know that everything is gradually aligning in a way you have never seen before. And gradually, you will notice another subtle shift. You no longer feel the need to speed up your life's process. What needs to come will come. What needs to leave will leave. And you are no longer in the position of trying to control that rhythm. Instead, you become part of that flow, moving with it with a quiet but steady trust. There may not be a clear moment for you to declare that everything has stabilized, but you will recognize it through the way you move, lighter, more precise, and no longer carrying the feeling of having to become someone other than yourself. Perhaps what you have just gone through is not a series of separate signs, but a very precise process, quietly guiding you to a point you have never reached before. Not to return to your old self more powerfully, but to step into an entirely different way of existing, where you no longer need to strive to become, because you have begun to live in alignment with what has always been within you. The greatest comeback in life is not about reclaiming what you have lost, but when you no longer need to return to any previous version of yourself. You do not go back to the starting point. You move to a point from which everything begins to operate according to a completely different logic, deeper, more real, and no longer based on what you once had to strain to maintain. If this video resonates with you at any level, share it with those who are also on their own journey, and do not forget to subscribe to continue exploring together the depths that not everyone is ready to face. And perhaps, from this very moment, you have already begun to step into a comeback you were never clear enough to recognize before.